It's Tom Albright with AVNation, with an AVNation special celebrating International Women's Day for the entire month of March. Why? Because there's an awful lot of really great women in the AV industry, and we want to get as many stories as possible. With me today to tell her story is Deborah Jones from the Queen Elizabeth II Center. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
So one of the more common questions that folks will get when they first meet each other in the industry is, how did you get involved in AV? So Deborah, kind of take me along the journey, and how did Deborah Jones get involved in AV?
I would say that I'm not uncommon with most people within the AV industry. A lot of people fall into it by accident, and indeed the same thing happened to me. I was an events manager, managing different kinds of live events for an association, a not-for-profit association, and I came across enormous amounts of money, or it seemed like that to me then. A large part of my budget, other than room hire, was being spent on audiovisual and technical. And in those days, it was a considerable proportion, and you weren't usually interested in spending it on food and drink, being a live events industry. But in this case, I was more interested in spending on how people can look and see our organization. And that's what audiovisual does for me. It gives a brand identity, it gives a culture, it indicates all sorts of things about your brand. To me, it's the eyes and ears of your organization. And that's what interests me most about audiovisual. I think the clue's in the name.
Talk for a second, because you're in AV and IT sales for QE2, right? And talk about the evolution of the IT part of not just your job, but also the IT part of AV that you've watched over the years.
So of course, AV and IT, when I started in the industry, were and I believe still a little bit the case in some organizations, were just miles apart.
Yeah.
And we indeed at the Queen Elizabeth II Centre have a separate ICT department still. But of course, we work extremely closely together now in order to fulfill any kind of live event, because it's intricate to the very nature of the project. And in this particular year, in the year of the COVID-19, you will see increasingly that when people had to act really quickly, they reached out for software. It's so much easier to buy software and get updates on that than it is to go out and get 10 converters, for instance, and then upgrade them. It's cheaper. The skill set's entirely different, so there's something to be said about training there. But in the end, everything for the pandemic has been about software.
Well, it also, one of the issues that we all saw in this, and you probably did as well, is the supply chain got disrupted quite significantly last year, and there is very little, if not any, software or supply chain issues when it comes to the software part, right? Obviously, you do need the hardware to run on it, but once you have that, you can adjust and put different pieces of software on that. So yeah, absolutely. People did.
Don't forget that the software can dictate the hardware these days.
Absolutely.
So if you've got NDI compatible software, and you want to change to, I think, SRT or whatever the next bit of software is, then quite frankly, you're going to have to look at your hardware purchases before that. So it just depends which kind of protocol you're going to be using, and what your skill set is of your people, and whether they wish, or your freelancers, because obviously we use a lot of freelancers in the live events industry, and how you are prepared to train them. We do a lot of training for freelancers, and we're very lucky. We have both men and women who are interested in working for us, and we're looking very closely at getting them all together. When we finally open, the government in the UK is putting the okay on live events, hopefully round about the 17th of May. And we're looking to train up all our people, but first of all, we're looking at the tension between the software and the hardware.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right about how the hardware will indeed, can be dictated by the software and the capabilities that they're asking
Exactly.
for. Right.
Mm. And it's it's not a completely different skill set, but obviously there are different skill sets involved now with the software and the hardware. And engineers, especially on the data side, have to have all that they've had a long time to do it. Perhaps you could say, because a lot of them in the industry haven't been working all the time. And in fact, a lot of them have kind of generated. Moved over to the digital media area anyway, but they've had some time to retrain, but but obviously there's been less practice on hybrid events as opposed to virtual events, and that's what we're waiting to see.
Yeah, and absolutely taking those skill sets forward, actually.
Mhm.
Um, Deborah, talk for a second about some of the challenges you faced over the years. One of the questions we're asking folks is looking at, whether that's inherent prejudice, embedded prejudice, if there's a situation or some sort of hurdle that you've had to overcome. How did you overcome that?
I'm very lucky because I work for the government. And then, as I said before that, I worked for not-for-profit associations. And the culture of those particular organizations is such that they promote diversity. They've got a corporate responsibility in terms of diversity of their employees, uh, uh, mentoring, training, staff development generally. So I could say that I've been extremely lucky, or I could say that maybe that's a progressive kind of organization. That's their competitive advantage, that
Yeah.
they can draw on those diverse skill sets in in a diverse workforce. I think mentoring has a big part to play in that. And again, I think the audiovisual industry is particularly good at promoting such programs as mentoring. I mean, the AVIXA Foundation is a good example of that, and the AVIXA Women's Council is very energetic. It's a very forward-looking part of the organisation. And in the same way, the AV User Group, which is a group of end users, again, they promote women, they promote mentoring. And the audiovisual industry is extremely lucky to have such organisations where they promote those kind of corporate values, really.
Talk about that for a second, because when you look at the percentage of women that are involved in certain organizations, right, and obviously the AVIXA Women's Council has a heavily good number of women that are involved in that. But then you look at the user group. Do you think that makeup of groups like the AV User Group or some other peer organizations, is that indicative of the number of women in the industry? Is it 5 to 10% of women in the industry, or do you think there's more and they just don't feel comfortable, getting into some of those peer groups?
I think the main difference between maybe the women and the men in either the AV User Group and or in AVIXA is the sphere of AV that they tend to migrate towards. So in the case of AVIXA, I find that women gravitate towards soft services, or that's what the research tells me. So in audiovisual, it tends to be sales and marketing rather than the technical areas such as the engineering side, or perhaps even the technician area. What I do find is that women quite often, in the case of the AV User Group, the end users there are usually in senior managerial positions, and I think they have to be probably really good to get to that level within the corporations and within the associations or the kind of organizations they work for. But then, of course, I'm biased. But I do find that particularly in the AV User Group, they are in quite senior positions and they know their stuff all the way through, because they've had to know from technician all the way up to installations, up to large scale project management, which might be constructing and installing complete AV and IT in a building in the Middle East or India or another continent, but at the same time, perhaps having to get rid of all the legacy equipment for video conferencing and put in all the bright new stuff that's come in since. They're in charge of quite large scale things. What I think is the most telling thing about it is the qualification. There's probably maybe a 3% chance that women in AV will have a CTS qualification, which to me is staggeringly low, because it's not really indicative of the skills that I've witnessed in women. They're no different from any of the any of the men that they're perhaps in competition with, but they don't seem to have the CTS qualification, which makes me think that perhaps if there was something more geared up to the soft services, you might get more people qualifying. So I don't think it's about ability. I think it's probably about how you target it. But education is the key thing.
If you could speak directly to AVIXA, or you could wave a magic wand, how would you change that? How would you get more of the women in the industry to get their CTS?
I think what I'd do is I'd start it from both ends. One, obviously, I promote it, and I'd start probably in year probably 9, something like that, or in secondary school, or maybe earlier. I mean, between primary and secondary school in this country, which is when they're about age 10 or 11, and get young girls interested in audiovisual, because at that point they wouldn't even know there was such a profession.
Yeah.
So I'd start from that end and publicize it, and not CTS at that point, but in a career in the audiovisual industry, hopefully with a qualification. And then at the other end, I think you need to sit on the committees. Unfortunately, there's a lot of committee work involved, which generally doesn't appeal to people who are attracted to the audio-visual live events industry. Sitting in a committee is not what they want to do. They want to be on a live event. They want to be making it all happen. They want razzmatazz.
They want to get their hands dirty.
Exactly. Committee structures do not attract the same sort of people. But at the end of it, someone's got to do their work. Someone's got to do the dirty stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that if you sat on the committee and promoted a different kind of CTS, or maybe change the modules. I think CTS is very sound. It covers all the physics. It equips you for the management side. It's taken years to perfect it, but qualifications evolve. Everything evolves. AV and IT have evolved, and indeed CTS syllabus has evolved. It obviously is embracing more IT every time that they make any changes. So I think that's what I'd do. I'd approach it from either end if I could.
Right. Deborah, you are nowhere near retirement, but let's take a look at that from that end. When you retire, what do you want to see have changed in the industry, and what hand do you want to have in it?
I would like to see, obviously, more women in the industry, more qualified women, because I do think that's a benchmark. If you've got CTS, you're obviously as good as everyone else with CTS, and they're predominantly men. So you have a great leveler in having that qualification. I'd like to see ICT and IT and AV joined up even more. And convergence was a long time coming. And again, that's something else that should evolve. And again, I'd like to see more not liaison, but more working together with the other professions, engineers, surveyors, architects. And this is something that each of those professions say as well to each other. The civil engineers say we've got to have more liaison with the mechanical engineers. The mechanical engineers say we have to have more liaison with the architects, and so on and so forth. But there's been this endemic cry from the audiovisual industry to say that we're last to be involved on any project. And this, amazingly, still happens. And so we're brought in when everything is about to be finished. There's dirt and dust everywhere. It's at the wrong stage. And even though we might be in at the beginning, quite often that people are ignored and until the final stages, when then you realize how much money you need to be able to communicate. And that's what audiovisual is about. The irony of it is that we're about communication.
Absolutely. Deborah Jones, that will be a great place to stop. Deborah Jones from the Queen Elizabeth II Center, thank you so much. If somebody wants to connect with you, how do they do that?
You can look me up on LinkedIn under Queen Elizabeth II Center. I'm quite happy for people to like me on Twitter. And I'm on all social media except Instagram. And then obviously I'm a member of the AV user group, so you can go onto our website, avusergroup.com. And I'm actually a director of the London user group. And you can also get me via AVIXA. We've been members since 2006.
Excellent, Deborah Jones. Thank you so much. For us, for AVNation, go by our website, avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv. You'll find this program and a host of others, including our AVNation specials highlighting the women of the AV industry all month long. All that and more at avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv.